Hi, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We're glad you joined us live if you're here live. I wanted to show you our upcoming Webinar Wednesdays because we do have some good ones coming up, and there's a few more that even aren't on here yet, but they will be. So right now you're in Bumped His Head and Went to Bed. This is our Webinar Wednesday page on our website. High Plains Fair Housing will be here July 27th, talking about your housing rights as someone with a brain injury. Lit Up My Mind is coming off to August 10th, and Laura has been with us before. She's out of Colorado and she has her own website and does a lot with support groups and things, and so she's going to tell us her story and talk about what she does with her groups. And then on August 24th, we're going to do Community Connects and Free Through Recovery and Peer Support Specialists, which are all disciplines that will work with people with brain injury throughout our state. And so we want to explain how you can utilize these programs. And then, like I said, there are some more scheduled, but they're working on the website to get them up. But this September 21st one is the author of a book called Saving Shannon, and he's going to tell his story of his daughter that was hit by an SUV at the age of 3 and kind of talk about her recovery and things like that. So, and then as you know, all of the recorded ones are here. And as you'll see, Bumped His Head and Went to Bed is here for you, but this is only half of it. We had a glitch, of course, just at the right time. So it cut off half of our recording. So we are re-recording today. So then this will get replaced and you will get to watch the whole thing later if you'd like. But CEUs can be requested on this website as well. On this page, you just click on CEU request, and that should be up by Friday afternoon at the latest. It's usually before that, but yeah, so I will let Shannon take it away.
Alrighty. Notes this time. We'll see. These are my super professional notes. So I will start with a disclaimer. A few disclaimers. This is just my story. I'm not a doctor. It's just my experience, my story, my perspective, and my own research. And if you're interested in anything, or if anything I say you feel like it needs some scientific background, go ahead and do some research on it, or you can message me too, and I can tell you what I found and what brought me to the beliefs that I have on different things. I know everyone's situation is different, and I don't fully know the audience and everyone's perspective. So I have a lot of different passions when it comes to being the caregiver, from the patient's point of view, I don't know if you know, the victim of head injuries point of view, practitioners. I have a passion from every angle. And so please don't hesitate to ask me to go a certain direction after I'm done talking. So what I thought I'd do is read the book first, and then tell you our story, and then talk about the purpose of the book and why I wrote it, and what I hope for. So Carly, do you want to help me do the screen share?
Yep. So that square at the bottom. Yep.
Okay. And there we go. Look at that. Okay, so then now you guys, this thing on the side is over my little, it won't turn the page. Can I move this? Oh,
you can move. Yep. We're seeing the cover right now. Yeah, there. Okay. Now.
That's the cover. Yeah, and the book it's just called Bumped His Head and Went to Bed, and it's the true story about the life of Greg the Great. And we named him Greg the Great because my daughters and I decided what to name him, and he was just this iconic, larger than life man. And he was a football player. He was also a cowboy. And so the illustrator, Scott Monaco, he had a tall order. I said, he needs to be a football playing little cowboy guy that is little and then big and then sad and happy. So he did a beautiful job on the illustration. So, all right, Bumped His Head and Went to Bed. And also it was originally written for my granddaughter, but we'll get to that later. So it goes like this. When Greg the Great was young, he played outside all day. Rough and tumble sports were his favorite games to play. He loved his dog named Prince. He took him hunting every fall. He played hard in backyard football with no helmet on at all. When Greg the Great got older, he worked diligently at his studies while growing bigger than his parents and most of his buddies. Greg the Great played so much football, he got the nickname Boz. He loved his team. He loved to tackle. He loved the cheering and the applause. He played defense. He played offense. He tackled and he trained. He bumped his head and went to bed. He didn't know he broke his brain. After football in college, he met a girl and it was time. They had a purple wedding and everything was fine. Greg the Great became a dad, not a single boy, 3 girls. No more football, no more tackling, just princess games and ballet twirls. The girls were so much fun, he bought them all a horse. Greg the Great got in that saddle and was bucked right off, of course. Grown-up Greg the Great still loved to play and hunt and race. One day while riding his horse real fast, he crashed and landed on his face. All his head bumps, old and new, added up to 44. But this bump was a big one. It broke his brain a whole lot more. Here's the part where things get weird. Greg started acting kind of strange. Greg the Great began to slow down. All those brain bonks made him change. When it started, no one noticed. He just sat a little slouchy. Eventually, he started feeling grumpy and super grouchy. Greg became quite forgetful. He was tired and often sad. He said, "I'm just so frustrated," while running scared and looking mad. Greg said and did some things that Greg the Great would never do. His brain just was not working right. But what nobody knew, brains are very delicate, so when they are bumped and bruised, the person who is attached to it feels broken and confused. Some don't know what's happening, some do, but hide it well. Broken brains need help fast. It's so important that you tell. Tell someone and quickly go to a special concussion doctor. Don't wait, it's very dangerous. It could stay broken for forever. There's something you should know about a brain injury disaster. A broken brain can take away your happily ever after. The end. So it's the end, but not the end of the book. And just a little side note, the book was written kind of in a children's book format. It was originally written for our granddaughter because I had to figure out a way to tell her what happened to Papa. It's for children, but my daughter, who's a rodeo queen, she's Miss Rodeo Mandan. She was doing a book reading at a library a week ago in Mandan, and she wanted to read the book. And I thought, I don't know if that's appropriate for kids. And so, it can be, but it's an important message. It's just, is it a children's book or isn't it? That has yet to be determined, I'd say. We'll see. And there's a little poem in the original book that's going to help us get to the next section. And I have that here. It's not in the little slideshow here. I'll get to the other part, but it goes like this. It says, "Are you okay or not? You think it's better left unsaid? If you're hurt, confused, or anxious, could it be you've hit your head? Let's do a little count of all your head bumps, old and new. Even small hits count and have a big impact on you. Be the hero of your story. If your own words can't explain, show this book to someone who can help find out what hurt your brain." So that's just a little lead in to the next part, because the main part of, oh, there it is. It is on there. Never mind. So here's the part where I made it very user-friendly, very non-threatening, very non-clinical, because in my own personal situation, we should have known what was going on and we didn't. And I think that my experience with my husband, that I'll tell you about in a minute, and also people that I've met since writing the book, what's happened is I've met people who just don't know that what they're experiencing is associated with brain injuries, or they've just discovered it. But a lot of people aren't able to describe that. And I know Chris Nowinski, who is the founder of Concussion Legacy Foundation, has a TED Talk out that's fantastic. So Google that, look it up, watch it. It's amazing. There's a little part in there where Chris says, the thing about a broken brain, and this is not word for word, it's close. The thing about a broken brain is that when your brain is the thing that's broken, it can't recognize its own injuries. And yeah, I totally paraphrased. Brandon, don't tell Chris that I haven't memorized it. But the point is when a brain is broken, it can't recognize its own brain injury. And that was very true for my husband. And so this is just very non-threatening, a way for a wife to say, hey, I wonder if this is what's going on with my husband, or, my child, parents to look at it, or someone who could look at it themselves and say, gosh, maybe that's what's going on. So, and the 44, the significance of 44, that was my husband's football number. He didn't just have 44 head injuries. We don't know how many he had. Lack of diagnosis, lack of record keeping, lack of knowledge led to us just not knowing. So, and this is just 44 ways you may have bumped your head, 44 symptoms of a broken brain. These are just a beginning, just to get the thoughts going. And then the goal is to put it on a timeline and to get it documented, have someone else look at it and take a look at the possibility that maybe the head injuries could be contributing to something that's going on, so that you can get help. Then you'll see at the bottom of the page some information from Concussion Legacy Foundation in Boston. And on the next page, lots of resources that they've provided for people to have some direction if they do find that head injuries could be contributing to what they're experiencing, or if they have any questions. Then that's the end, blah, 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 little story. And this is where you'll find information about us. Also at the bottom, you'll see the wrong website. I have stickers. It's concussionfoundation.org. All the books have a sticker on them. It's not concussion.org, it's concussionfoundation.org. So there's the printed books have the proper websites on there. And the bottom one is our story. So now we can stop sharing, I suppose. There we go. And so if I were to go into now the part about our story and how the book came about, it was 4 years ago. It will be September 11th that I found my husband after he committed suicide. And I tell you that first because that's how it was for me. I had no idea that that was a possibility. It was all of a sudden one day I walked into my husband's office and there he was. And so trauma, of course, and shock led to a lot of what the hecking and wondering what had happened. And, a week later, his funeral happened. And the day after his funeral, one of the ladies that came to my classes that I taught at work, she said, Shannan, did he have some head injuries? And I said, no. And, he was a linebacker. He played offensive line and defensive line in college, high school, junior high. He also was a cowboy. He did cowboy mounted shooting. And on the back of the book, I don't know if you can see it. If it's, nope, you can't. There's a picture of him doing the event that he finally got a terrible head injury and was knocked out with on May 5th of 2018. And after that, nothing was ever the same. So he was never the same. And I became afraid of him. His behavior became bizarre. And still, I never knew that it was going to end with his suicide. So when that was proposed to me, that the possibility of suicide being attached to brain injuries, I started to look into it and got a lot of information, not all helpful. It was so all over the board that I didn't know that. I thought immediately you could just get CTE suddenly and then commit suicide and die. So I thought, well, there's got to be a test for this. And, there's just a lot to learn about brain injuries, and there's still so much that's unknown. And I know one thing that I've learned through Concussion Legacy Foundation is if you've seen one brain injury or concussion, you've seen one brain injury or concussion. And So it doesn't mean that our story is going to mirror any other story, but I hope that it gives indicators and helps people to pursue the possibility of that might be what they're dealing with and pursue some brain healing protocols. The other part of it is the fact that we got answers, and a lot of people who deal with suicide, who have lost someone to suicide, they don't know why. Most people don't know why. And I know that suicidality is it's a symptom or an indicator of head injuries, and it happens a lot with head injuries. So to explore that is never a terrible idea if you're dealing with a family member or a loved one who is suicidal, talking about those head injuries. So back to my story. I guess the way that things started for us was slowly. I would say back in our 30s. The only reason I'm saying this is because there was a webinar that I got to attend with Concussion Legacy Foundation where they were talking about REM sleep and how talking in their sleep, acting out in their sleep can be an early indicator that CTE is developing. And again, that would be something that you need to look up and get the particulars on because I don't have it right in front of me. But I know for me, for our story, that was very true of my husband. He, in his 30s, he started sitting up and talking about things, weird things, and we would laugh and we would talk about it the next day. And the girls love to hear the stories about what dad was talking about in his sleep the night before. And it was never scary. I know we had a friend who, at the same time that Greg played football with, we went out to dinner, and the wife had a black eye because her husband, who was also a linebacker, he had sat up in the middle of the night and he was dreaming that someone was chasing him, and he turned around and whacked her with his elbow and injured her. And he was doing the same thing, and they both were linebackers. So anyway, that may be an early indicator for us, and I don't know for sure, but possibly. And as far as if I were to put my finger on the beginning of when things started to change for us dramatically, I would say maybe 2013. We were trying to get a Christmas picture, and it was Thanksgiving. And I remember I had to Photoshop the crap out of my own hair because my husband's face was he was just angry and distraught. And I kept saying, "What's the matter? Why are you angry?" And I remember that was a really weird time, and I'm not sure why, if he had another head injury at that time. Not remembering exactly, but I know that was a very difficult time. And whatever was going on, I thought maybe midlife crisis. I thought maybe he was just unhappy with me. Whatever it was, that picture is an indicator and kind of a marker for me of when things started to change. And so if CTE is a contributor, you'll see behaviors, which that's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Sorry, I know last time we had to kind of define that. That's the disease that starts early in life and progresses and has a set of symptoms, and we can talk about that later. But you start to see those in midlife very commonly, and marked by depression and risk-taking behavior, things like that. But then there's also recent traumatic brain injuries and concussions that I know in our story that my husband had, and that compounded our situation. So because he was training horses and competing in cowboy mounted shooting, he would get into accidents, and we'd look out in our arena out in the yard and see him on the ground and the horse running around. And he wouldn't tell me about all of the hits that he had. He just didn't mention it, just would shake it off and try to be a tough guy. And I even found out that he had cracked ribs from a friend who saw him come off his horse at a horse show, and he got up and said, "Nobody, don't tell my wife." And they all laughed and thought that was great. And to fall off your horse hard enough to crack ribs probably means you got a good little head injury that day too. So the number of head injuries that he had we're pretty unsure, but his behavior was indicating that something was going on. And he was more, I would say, his empathy was probably the first thing to go. And he became more interested in his own like pursuits of hobbies and just wanted to be happy, and his responsibilities started, his sense of responsibility to our home and our anything difficult. He was trying to avoid doing difficult things and avoiding conflict a lot. And then when difficult things did present themselves, he wasn't handling them very well. And he was a very calm, gentle giant type of a person. So that was different. And then, so there were a couple of occasions that I did have to call the police, and because of his suicidality. And I remember saying to the police, this isn't the man I married. And they were very kind. They had sent a special task force over that deals with domestic situations. And I so can't wait. I hope one day to go tell them, anytime a wife says, this is not the man I married, you need to do a little bit of a, concussion, maybe, I don't know, just, ask him, has he had any concussions? Did he used to play football? Here's a book. I don't know. Here's a questionnaire. So because if we would have had that information at that time, our story could possibly look a lot different than it does today. And that particular summer, after Greg's final head injury, the big one where he was knocked out and taken to the ER and released 30 minutes later without a diagnosis, was the bizarre behavior that followed is what convinced me that we were dealing with head injuries, because now I have this little map of things that don't make sense, that weren't true to his behavior, things that were out of character, where I was able to write those things down and look at them and say, that's not something anyone of this age or maturity level would ever do. And therefore it can only be related to the head injuries. I, as a spouse, had a hard time. Of course, you do the whole self-blame thing, and having those indicators were key to my own healing from trauma and shock. And I guess, when it comes to the family's experience of loss to suicide, or even more importantly, dealing with someone who they know has head injuries, there is so much help. And I know that's what North Dakota Brain Injury Network does, is provides resources and support and encouragement. And wow, what would my story be if I would have known what I know now, if I knew then what I know now, and if I would have had some resources. So, the purpose for my book was, just a minute, I'm gonna look at my super professional notes. So, the reason I wrote the book is, due to the shock that I didn't know what was going on. I think that was the big push, was I can't believe that I didn't know that this is what was going on. I can't believe that, because it was so obvious. Once I looked at those indicators, it seemed so very obvious. And I wanted to know, I wish that I want to tell people so that they're not as shocked, so that they know what's happening. And I want to also be able to share that correlation between the head injuries and the suicidality, because the TBIs, that's traumatic brain injuries, the CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the post-concussion syndrome, all of those conditions have suicidality as a symptom. And so, but to know that as the general public, as not being a doctor, that, those things, that's not common knowledge. It's becoming common knowledge. And I know Concussion Legacy Foundation likens that to the Stop Smoking campaign, the Wear Your Seatbelt campaign, that it's going to take a generation of people getting that information out for people to truly understand that, oh, your suicidality may have been preceded by head injuries, or, oh, you have a head injury, watch out for suicidality. And so to have those two things connected could really be key in preventing a lot of suicides and changing the course of someone's life, obviously. And also, I also wrote the book because I want people to know that there's help. We didn't know that we had anything going on, so therefore we didn't think we needed that type of help. We just went to marriage counseling. And to know that there is help available, that there are brain healing protocols, that there's a network of practitioners that have the right information. That's good information to have, and everyone should have that information. And therefore it's preventable to know that the information out there is getting to the point where you can say, hey, maybe you should wait before you sign your kid up for for tackle football. Let's just wait a few years, or maybe let's switch sports, or whatever those choices are. It can help you to make different life decisions so that you can prevent those head injuries. The other one is, if you've had head injuries, prevent any further deterioration, as in our case, by don't get any more head injuries. Just how about just being real careful that you don't become a competitive cowboy mounted shooter. And when you used to play football, that would have been a good choice for us. So, and when it comes to, if I were to narrow down my passion and this message, what is my message? I can't narrow it down to one thing, because there are so many things that came into play and that continue to come into play. And so I can't say that it's just to get kids to not play tackle football. That's not it. And, because there's also the element of, for example, in the Midwest, my husband is a typical Midwesterner. And I try to explain this to the people in Boston, because they're like, just don't do those things, guys. Just don't do them. I'm like, you don't understand. We're a bunch of rednecks out here. And my family does rodeos, and my daughter's a rodeo queen. And she gave a speech to the Mandan rodeo committee and a bunch of people out in Mandan a year ago about head injuries and the loss of her dad. And because you're stepping on toes with football players, with bull riders, when you say, hey, you shouldn't do that anymore because you could hurt your head, they're like, what are you talking about? If I don't do these things, I wouldn't be living. I wouldn't feel like I'm living my life. And that's exactly what my husband would have said. If I would have known he had head injuries, if he would have known and we said, you probably shouldn't do that anymore, he'd say, I'd rather die living than stop doing what I love, because I wouldn't feel alive. And that was part of her speech that she gave. She said, your husband, or your husband and your son and your dad are probably a lot like my dad. And you can't take away what they love, but you can be cautious. You can make different decisions, or maybe go to team roping instead of bull riding, things like that. And just, if you do get a head injury, follow up with some brain healing protocols. But so the different elements that I'm passionate about are first of all, for the people that have symptoms and that feel like they are symptomatic, to really press in and get diagnoses. We left the ER without a diagnosis, and he went on and played the next round of cowboy mounted shooting the next day, and never did stop hurting his head that whole year, or the following 4 months that he was alive. And so it's about getting a diagnosis, and also having your hands on some resources and some practical advice, like being careful not to hit your head again. Dr. Cantu out in Boston at Concussion Legacy Foundation promotes doing a Mediterranean diet to get your brain inflammation down. That's crucial, and it's very useful. And I've seen people come back and report that it's changing their symptoms, that their headaches will literally go away when they change their diet. And it's an indicator, and it's very effective. And also for spouses and family members, if you have a diagnosis and you know what you're dealing with, you're going to proceed differently with your spouse, with your dad, with your son. We got marriage counseling, and if I were to do something different, it would be brain injury counseling and caregiver counseling. And I would have set fewer boundaries on him. I would have said, that's not you, that's just your brain today. Do you need a nap? What have you been eating lately? And it would have been less scary because we would have had the knowledge. And Mike and Kim Adamle, you can Google that. It's Adamle. Mike played NFL football, and they have a great website. I can't remember the website, but they are a wonderful resource for how to navigate CTE and head injuries as a couple. And if I would have known then what they know and had their information, it would have helped tremendously. And the way that Kim has talked about how she deals with Mike on his difficult days is precious. It's very precious. And she is to be commended for all she's done. And they've suffered terrible loss lately, and they soldier on. As far as I know, I haven't followed up lately, but they've got a lot of good resources on their page as well on Facebook. And I'm not sure if they have a website. So then the other thing I'm super passionate about, and this came from my daughters, with the suicide prevention campaign, it can be it's almost triggering for my daughters because we as a family feel that concussion prevention can often equal suicide prevention, and not doing a full exploration of why someone is feeling suicidal seems, and yes, from where we're sitting, because we have hindsight, hindsight is 2020. It seems counterproductive from our perspective, to say, well, we just are suicidal and we just have some mental illness. And mental illness as a standalone, find out, is it a standalone or is it possibly attached to some previous head injuries? Just ask, just explore it, just kind of maybe do a little evaluation. When did you last have a concussion? And it doesn't have to be a knockout. And the more you look into how much head injuries contribute to mood disorders, you'll be surprised how little you have to hit your head, how gently you have to hit your head in order to come up with some symptoms and some behaviors attached to what can look like mental illness. So that, let me see, checking my super professional my future. Yes. Do I have a future? All I know is this is all blurred out because I'm moving while I'm packing to move. And there's a lot of boxes and piles back there. So in the process of preparing to list my house. And, the only thing that I really have a passion to do in the future right now is to spread this message, obviously to visit my grandbaby. And I have another one on the way, by the way, yay. So, it's to spread this message of the effect of head injuries and all that I just said. But the first thing I'm going to do when I don't have to worry about this house and everything is I plan to visit the different concussion recovery places anywhere in my area that claims to treat concussions, whether it's a physician or a counseling center or a treatment center or a clinic. Because with the help of Concussion Legacy Foundation, they have a list of things, criteria for different places. They would like to create a network of recovery sources. And if we have anything in our area, it would be great to be able to refer them to a network that is promoted by Concussion Legacy Foundation, because in my opinion, Concussion Legacy Foundation is at the leading edge of research. They're the entity that is responsible for looking at all of the brains of the NFL players. And they are the ones that are getting the research done and getting the healing protocols ahead of everyone, I think, in this race to figure out what's going on with brains. And so to be part of that network and to be able to refer people to someplace here in Fargo or in this area, in the state, even anywhere between here and Minneapolis, I guess, for that matter, between both states, it would be nice to be able to have a referral from that is approved by them as well. And or close to it. And so if I were to have a dream job, it would be to go around to different concussion places and physicians and treatment centers and ask them what they're doing so that I know what they're doing, so that when people get a hold of me, I can say, well, I know this place has this, that has that, but also to present them with the information from Concussion Legacy Foundation, as far as what their criteria are, and to also say, hey, they've got these resources, and team up. So, there's just a lot of things that I want to do, a lot of things that I'm to get my message out, and I think that it's going to happen, I think one day all of the information on concussions will come together, and nope, I take it back. Maybe it won't come to one, it won't be able to be put in a box and tied up in a bow, but all the information will be out there someday. But until then, that's where my passion lies, is in the fact that it's not out there, and that there's still so much to learn, and knowing one little piece of it, over here, this person that knows one little piece doesn't know this big piece. And so there's just a lot of unfinished business and unanswered questions and untapped into resources that I think it would be great to put together and to have a referral network. So there is that is where I am ending my little, summary of everything. And I don't know if I elaborated on our story enough, or, how about let's do what we did last time, Carly, where, we can take it.
Yeah, sure. Yes. So anybody have any questions right away for Shannan? For those of you watching the recording later, we have been putting some websites in the chat. So concussionfoundation.org is the Concussion Legacy Foundation's website. Bumpedhishead.com is where you can purchase the book that Shannan read to us. And Brandon is with Concussion Legacy. Do you want to say anything, Brandon? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you want to, you're welcome to do a plug or say hi.
No, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, Shannan, great job, as always, sharing Greg's story. And I just think it's so cool that you've turned this into a children's story and are so passionate about this and want to bring it specifically to your very niche community of the rodeo community. I think that's something that we just we're not thinking very much of, and is obviously just as prone to this injury as anyone else. So appreciate you being a warrior for us in the Middle States, and just in awe of everything that you've done to honor Greg's legacy.
Thank you, Brandon. Brandon's been very key and a great resource when it came to even grammar. I'm like, read this, Brandon. Is my grammar okay? How are my pronouns? How's my punctuation? You've been so helpful the whole way along.
Oh, well, thank you. I've actually got to run, but Shannan, great to hear from you. And Carly, thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, if anyone needs anything, CLF is here for you. I'll put our helpline link in the chat. I think that's probably the best place.
Thank you.
If you or someone is looking for any support with anything related to concussion or suspected CTE, then we have a helpline there where you can send a request to, and then our people can get you in touch with resources, support, mentorship. We've lots of things available for those in need. So I'll leave you with that. But yeah, thanks everybody. And see you, Shannan.
Thanks, Brandon. Good to see you. I mean, kind of see you.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah, so yes, and he put that in the chat too. So concussionfoundation.org/helpline. And then I did, when you were talking about football and you mentioned the football thing, I did find an article recently about the study that Sanford did with youth football, and they are showing, fewer head impacts. They had a 79% reduction in head impacts after studying the youth football team for 8 consecutive sessions. So they did a study where they added impact monitors to helmets. And then they also used the USA Football's Heads Up football program, which is kind of teaching players to hit differently and not hit with their head. I mean, you can still play football and still tackle, but they're teaching a different way and not to lead with your head and things like that. And it is showing great improvement. So that's exciting to see. I'm glad to see that, because we definitely would, whenever I present to young kids, I say, you know, this doesn't mean that we don't want you to have fun, and we still want you to play, and we still want you to get to do all the things you like to do, but just do it safely. And yes, if you're wearing the proper equipment and all of that, you know, it's not a guarantee, but you're definitely much more likely to stay safe. And then I did put Mike, how did you say his last name?
Adam Lee.
Adam Lee. So I put that, it's mikeadamlee.org is his website. So I put that in the chat for you as well, because those were some resources that Shannan had mentioned and that we talked about. So anyone else have any questions?
Because I can elaborate on anything. You know, here's another angle too. So coroners, you know, the day I found my husband and was literally on the ground outside of his office and white as a ghost and, you know, in shock. And, you know, the first police officer on the scene just happened to be a dear friend of our family. So that was a comfort to have him there, but he obviously had to run into the office and, you know, to assess the situation. And when the coroner showed up, she was amazing. She got down on the ground with me, and the first thing she said was, "Did he have any head injuries?" And I don't remember her saying that, but she said, I talked to her, gosh, a month after, and she said, "Shannan, I asked you if you had any head injuries, and you said no." And you know, she's a rare person. Christy is her name. She's from Cass County, and she's gone to different suicide trainings and mental health trainings. And I remember what she said after she asked if he had head injuries, and I said no. She said, "You know, I'm going to tell you that you know, it's always at least 3 layers deep." She said, "Talk to me about what's been going on then." And I talked about our marriage problems. I can't even remember everything, but she just was very comforting. But to give coroners that information it's a gift to the family. You're not saving a life, but you know, where would I be today if I didn't have this information as well? And there was another way I was going to take that. But oh gosh, what was I going to say? Coroner. Oh, medical examiners. You know, football player ends up on your table, you know, a middle-aged football player ends up on your table. You know, the first thing you should do is ask yourself, did he have head injuries? And, you know, because you're saving a family, you're saving a son from thinking, oh, this is genetic, now I'm also going to commit suicide, and going through his whole life thinking that there's a family predisposition to suicidality and mental health issues. And, you know, yeah, it might be if the son played football and the dad played football. And, but my point is, you know, to give the family the gift of the knowledge that it could be brain injuries I can't even put a price on that. It's, you know, and here's another little thing. I think we talked about this last time. All right, so today, yeah, my other disclaimer is if the dogs bark, it's because I have dogs and they sometimes bark when I tell them not to. But I have a dog that she has seizures, and I think it came from possibly like tick medicine or something. I don't know, but they wanted to put her on all kinds of seizure medication, and I did some research, and I just give her melatonin during a full moon and she doesn't have seizures. So the moon and solar activity contributes to suicidality. And so yesterday we happened to have the moon was at 98%. Today it's 100% full, and we also had a solar storm yesterday. And so I have a group on Facebook of people who have contacted me continuously about their own head injuries, and, you know, just asking for encouragement, you know, trying to find signs that there's hope. And they all have issues when there is a solar storm, when there's like a geomagnetic solar issue. And so I have an app on my phone that will give me an alert when there's solar activity going on, and then I will post in the group I'm not too busy, if all the stars align and I'm not busy, and I'll say, hey guys, there's a solar storm today, so watch yourselves for the next 48 hours. And then when there's also a full moon with it, forget about it. And I have one guy that has heart issues. He has an enlarged heart as well as brain injuries. And so it is heart and brain tissue that is at risk during a solar event where, because that's our electrical centers of our body. And when there's a magnetic, electromagnetic assault on the earth from the sun or the moon, apparently that affects human brain and heart tissue if it's inflamed, if it's compromised. So if you look at the police dispatch records in the next day or so, you'll notice an increase in suicidal male, suicidal female, heart attack, 911 call for heart issues. There's always more of them during a solar issue or a full moon. So, to know that ahead of time, the small group of people that I stay in touch with on Facebook in this group, they say, okay, that's good to know, because they can't sleep that night. They'll know, like, they can tell themselves, it's not me, it's my brain. It's just my brain. It's just my brain. It's not, I'm not going to die. It's neat. They can self-talk, and it's helped a lot.
I will say too, Envy Bin, at Envy Bin, we do have gun locks. If anybody would like one, we can send it to you or get that to you as well. The VA was actually kind enough to give us a bunch. So we have a bunch if that is something, because a lot of times when they look back at suicides by gun violence or attempted suicides by guns, and they interview the people that, that had the failed attempt, they say that if someone had intervened, within 5 to 10 minutes or so, they maybe wouldn't have done what they did. And so a gun lock can kind of deter that. And oftentimes they recommend to give the key to someone else, so that you have to ask that person for the key, and they can kind of assess your mental state when you want access to your gun, if you're a gun user. And then also one of the tips they gave too is called to, if you don't have someone to give it to, you can do a freeze the key, they call it. So you put the key in like a Tupperware bowl, you fill that with water, put it in the freezer, so that when you do want to access your gun, you need to wait for that ice to melt. So again, putting more time and space between action and thought is what thought and action. So
that's good. And I remember last time needing to differentiate between TBI, PCS, and CTE and all the acronyms. Do you want me to do that again?
Sure.
Okay. So a concussion is the closest to a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, and that's what happens in the immediate. So when someone refers to a TBI, that means they just suffered a traumatic brain injury. And then the next level is PCS, which is post-concussion syndrome, and that is the lingering effects of a TBI or the lingering effects of multiple TBIs or concussions. And also a TBI, you do not have to be knocked out for it to be considered a TBI. And post-concussion syndrome is more common with repeated head injuries. So you can have one concussion or several small concussions, small hits. And Dr. Cantu and Dr. Stern out in Boston at Concussion Legacy Foundation always are continually saying it's not the big hits, people, it's the small hits. It's little hit after little hit after little hit. Those are the ones that count. They all count. And even like whiplash, someone will say, well, I got a little whiplash. That is considered a head injury or like a form of TBI, according to Concussion Legacy Foundation. And because of the collective effects of those small hits, that's why they count them all. And because you can't have one big one and then have a bunch of little ones and think that those little ones didn't do anything, because they prevented the healing of the first one, and they also contributed to more brain inflammation. So you've got TBI, traumatic brain injury, you've got post-concussion syndrome, and then CTE is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which that's what they were featuring in the movie Concussion with Will Smith. And that is currently, that was only visible in post-mortem slides. They would have to take a thin slice of the brain, and obviously you can't do that in a living person. So now, as of, I believe, January, we were told in a webinar through Concussion Legacy Foundation, the family members were told that they have now discovered MRI angles, a certain slice of MRI angle from a certain MRI machine. Again, I'm not giving details, but I got this and I'm getting this far, that they can see it in the living. So they're able to do, it's a certain MRI machine that they can do a certain angle from and be able to see the lesions and what they need to see to diagnose CTE. And follow up on my story, my husband was diagnosed with unofficially stage 2 CTE, which stage 1 and 2 CTE are the moody, violent, acting out stages, and then 3 and 4 are more the there is depression obviously with the first 2 stages, but more depression in that 3rd stage, more physical symptoms, more memory issues. And so the way that that they diagnosed him, because there wasn't much brain tissue left, or I think my dog is coming in, letting himself in the door. I'm not sure. So the way that the diagnosis verbiage that they used for Greg is that it was not CTE. So because of the NFL and the way that they have put stops on, just full-blown embracing the fact that there is CTE, and the NFL wants to say that there's no such thing as CTE, and for whatever reasons, and I don't get in trouble or anything, but I don't know, but they have to say that they have to rule out Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, Lewy body, Lou Gehrig's, the ALS, and I believe one other one, and before they can say that it's CTE, because each one of those diseases presents differently in the brain tissue. And so when they're doing those examinations and those slices, it has to rule out all the others. So in my husband's case, they were able to say that it's not CTE. They had enough evidence to say that it's quite possibly CTE, but then when they took a look at it, they said it would be stage 2, and it's not CTE. And if it is, a stage 2. So that's all I was able to get, because I didn't know to donate his brain, because I didn't know that was the thing. Otherwise, I would have said, take the brain right to Boston, and then they would have been able to do it. But the movie Concussion, so the first person I called was Dr. Omalu from the movie Concussion, or I emailed him, and he emailed right back, and he signed it, "Cheers, Bennett." And I'm like, oh, just actually talking to the Will Smith guy. That's not Will Smith, but he was very, very informative. He's very expensive. And I was able to get a hold of one of his associates at UPMC, and it's Julia Koffler. Dr. Julia Koffler did my husband's neuro exam, pathology, all the words that I don't know. And she's the one that she also diagnosed the first MMA fighter, or WWE, one of those, with CTE. And so then she was able to send my husband's slides off to Boston. So we don't have that on the death certificate, but to have known ahead of time, I definitely would have said, yes, please take his brain to Boston right away, and because I would like that information.
Thank you for sharing that. We did get a comment in the chat. Christine mentioned that the VA also says to put a picture maybe of your family or something important to you on the outside of a gun safe, as a kind of a reminder as well that you have more to live for. And yeah, so that's a good tip too, I think. But yeah, I think I don't see any questions coming in.
I had a question about you mentioned I'm sorry, Carly, it's Chantal.
Go ahead.
Hey. I had mentioned it briefly in the chat, but when you were talking about the solar app and when it rains and storms, and I think you said you had an app for that. Mm-hmm. Could you provide that resource? Because I deal with that. I'm a 2-time brain injury survivor. And I also am now a resource facilitator with the Brain Injury Association of Georgia. So now I sit on both sides of the table. So being a survivor and now also being a person that helps other survivors, any resources are, and Carly, I tell you, I'm anything to help, because when you were talking about, it's so fragmented. Um, my first injury was a collision on the driver's side in 2018. My second one was a fall, and I was at home on my workout ball and fell and hit the back of my head on a table. And even working with the Brain Injury Association of Georgia, I just a few weeks ago went to a neural trauma research symposium. And these are the people that do research and help with those with traumatic brain injuries. And they have like a room where they have posters up of all the different research these university or scientists have done. And one of them was just about how TBIs are associated with immune issues and gut issues. And I asked the lady, I said, what made you decide? I said, well, first I can tell you that this is true because I live with it. And I asked her, what made you decide to go in this direction? And she said that it was what her department chair suggested. And so the next day we had a roundtable with researchers. And one of the things that they wanted to ask us as people that help TBI people, and when they found out I was a survivor, my first thing to them was, how about you ask us what research could be done in, or what support is needed to hone in on those things? Because you're right, it's like I'm studying to get my certification as a brain injury specialist. And one of the things they say in the book is we're called brain injury survivors. But when you think about a cancer survivor, and both my parents had cancer at the same time and they're both gone, so I can speak to this. There's two outcomes: either they survive it or they don't. A person with a traumatic brain injury of any kind, there is no one that can give you a date or time or indicator of this is how long this is going to take. And like you said, the symptoms can be all over the place, but the resources are fragmented. Trying to find the information, it can be frustrating. Trying to deal with how you feel as a caregiver, as a person with the TBI, it's a lot. And you're right. I say that all the time. If you see one brain injury, you see one brain injury. And the thing is, the symptoms don't stay the same. I'm so sorry for your loss. And I've spoken to, and I've been in a support group where a man, he had been married to his wife for over 20 years. And he, of course, his brain was affected where he lost his ability to understand emotion. And he said, I love my wife. I know I love my wife. I just don't feel that emotion of love towards her. Mm-hmm. And we're also part of an underserved work group. And one of the groups we want to connect with are, of course, veterans and those that have been, subjected to domestic violence, etc. And populations, like I'm an African-American female, and, that's not something that we really look at as minorities, is the value of, like, my nephews have both played football and they've both had concussions, but because of my story, I'm able to help my brothers walk through that. But just all survivors. So I guess I'm kind of going around in a circle, but just wanted to get the research you were talking about for the storms, and also tell you thank you for sharing your story. This webinar, Carly, was completely different than I thought, in the most surprising and wonderful way. Thank you for being vulnerable and for opening up. And I can't wait to take it back to the Brain Injury Association. And we are connected with the Brain and Spinal Injury Trust Fund Committee. Those are the two leading organizations in Georgia for helping people with brain injuries. And I'm with you that one day there will be, I hope, a traumatic brain injury center where the resources and the research is all under one umbrella. It can help people that deal with whatever type of brain injury they have. And so people can get the right support, from the doctors to the coroners, to make sure the families know, to make sure people know, because it is challenging for the survivors. and for the caregivers. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I need to hear that every once in a while, that what I'm saying matters and that what I'm doing matters. And life kind of takes over and you get caught in the darkness of, being a widow and all of the dynamics that come into play after a loss, like that, the trauma, the shock, the kids, the grandkids, the friends, the loss of our social network. And yeah, it's a big life change. And every once in a while, I just kind of think, does it matter? Does this matter to anybody? And so I need to hear that sometimes. And yes, I'm gonna learn how to put those resources in the chat because it's an app. So I think I have to figure out how to find the app online, right?
I can do it if you want to just tell me what the name of it is.
So the one, and I have an Android, I'm sure you can get it on Apple, but mine, I will tell you, it is, so the one that I use it's called Space Weather Reporter. Like right now, it's blowing up because we're in a very active solar cycle. And you won't understand, here's one thing to know, Chantel, too. You won't understand all the lingo if you're not a, whatever they are, those people that study those things, a space scientist, but you'll know when you should be alarmed. And it reports different types of, like a CME is a coronal mass ejection. And those I know are very impactful on brain and heart tissue and geomagnetic storms. They also report on things like interplanetary shocks, high-speed streams, magnetopause crossing. Solar flares are a big one, I know. But each one of those will impact, it'll reach the earth at a different time. So anywhere from 1 to 3 days, you kind of have to be aware of, after you get the notification, it could be 1 to 3 days. You have to kind of be aware of yourself for 1 to 3 days. And one of these days, I'm going to get a hold of one of those scientist people that knows these things, and they're going to explain it all to me. And I'm going to say, okay, if it's a solar flare and it's called this and it hits the earth, when does it hit the earth? I'm going to find out. But I mean, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know. But it has been very, very good information. There's also one called Space Weather Live. And then there's 2 other elements to be aware of. One is barometric pressure and the full moon. So all of those things can affect.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, because the barometric pressure, that one I knew, but this is important too, because when it rains and you feel like you're the gravity is pulling you to the ground.
That makes sense. And so imagine those days when it's a full moon like today, and then there's also a geomagnetic storm or some solar weather and the pressure is down. I mean, you must feel awful with a brain injury those days.
Oh yes. Now it's like, it's bad when people say, try to explain to us, like the researchers were like, well, try to explain to us, what does it feel like? And I tell them, a brain injury headache feels like you have a migraine and you're also dealing with vertigo and a mental contraction, a brain contraction, all at the same time. Because sometimes it gets so bad, especially with what you're talking about, you can literally feel the areas where you've been hit in the head.
Wow. On that note, let me ask you this. I mean, I don't know if I'm asking or proposing. Because you have glands in your head, the hypothalamus, pituitary, things like that. I've heard that one of the indicators can be messed up periods, sexual side effects, things like that. And I know you don't hear that a lot. You don't hear doctors making that connection. And it seems like they treat each element, each effect of a head injury separately, like, oh, your periods are messed up, therefore let's, do something with your hormones. But, would it be possible just to get that brain inflammation down, get all of the brain inflammation down, and then see, do I still have all of these different, effects? And so just weird symptoms, weird side effects I'm learning that people don't even associate with head injuries.
There's so many of them. It's so fragmented. Frontal lobe syndrome. I'll tell you from my head injury, I have Erland syndrome. Most people don't know what that is. There's an Erland syndrome institute. If you look up Erland syndrome, it has to do with, and athletes can have this. It's a problem with the brain's ability. I'm reading it formally to make sure I get it right. It is a problem with the brain's ability to process visual information. This problem tends to, it can be run in families, but because of it, you have a distortion of distance, and it's not just light and sound. So you have to go get tested from an Erland specialist, and then an Erland diagnostician prescribes you specific color lenses that the colors can sit on top of each other, that can go on top of whatever your prescription is. Then that goes out to the Erland Center in California for them to specially do your glasses. Neurologists have not heard of this that I've spoken to, and optometrists and ophthalmologists have not heard of this, although it's relative to eyes and brain injuries.
That's incredible. So you've got audio, visual, sexual, you've got a whole, like all over the board, different effects from the brain injuries. And so for someone to be able to come together and say, here's your set of symptoms and here's your treatment, that is probably a long way off, right?
It is, because of the comorbidity of it all, especially if you've had pre-existing conditions. Like I ended up with glaucoma in my left eye because I got hit in the head. No one will relate glaucoma to a head injury. It was my doctor that put it together. I ended up with fibromyalgia from the accident, and from the head injury. And now they are starting to associate all of it together. But you're right, because to have a person that takes you in hand, sits you down, and goes through every part of it, just the brain itself, calling it a TBI is just like, the grandiose of it all. But getting down to the nitty gritty, there's so many syndromes and symptoms and challenges in the frontal lobe, amygdala. It can be coming from all these different directions, depending on whatever side of the brain. You can have 10 different syndromes and symptoms just dealing with your brain, let alone what that's done to your body.
And let me ask this, and I don't know who can answer this, but there's a gal that I talk to regularly who, she struggles so much just with acting out and behaviors that are not acceptable, that are antisocial. And, has there been any talk about doing a brain injury bracelet for someone who is on a plane and, and the altitude, affected them and they start behaving bizarrely, or, they have a drink and they don't, realize that it was going to affect them and they're acting crazy and they end up getting thrown in jail, and or they pass out. It just seems like there should be a bracelet for people with brain injuries, just like there is for diabetes, or so that the general public knows, if this person ends up, needing help of some sort, they know what they're dealing with. Has there been any talk about that?
I don't know about a bracelet, but we do have, there's a law office that puts out, and I don't know if Carly knows about this, there's a brain injury card that you have in your wallet.
Yeah, we give those out at ND Bend too. Yep.
Yeah, that's and I like those because it has your emergency contact on it, and on the back of it, it lists the different types of challenges you might be dealing with currently. I'm a person with a brain injury, and it lists those different things. As far as bracelets, I don't know about that. To me, I think, Carly, I don't know about you, but that's the closest I've seen as far as traveling or
card
people
is
knowing.
the closest thing I've seen. Yeah.
So I don't know if you've seen any of those, Shannon, but those are good to have and to keep. I have actually two of them, one for my emergency contact when I'm back home in Michigan, and one while I'm here in Georgia. So
That's good. That is good. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? I did not see any, so I think we will call that good for today. Thank you so much for your time, Shannon. You're so brave, and we look forward to collaborating with you in the future.
Thanks for having me. It's an
Yes.
honor. Thanks for helping me get my message out.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
thank you so much for sharing. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.